There was a moment when it still could have been stopped. I remember it not as a thought, but as a physical sensation. The air already drawn into my lungs, my chest tight, my lips ready, and the silence in my headphones suddenly heavier than the people behind the glass. I could have asked for a pause. I could have moved the session. I could have said my voice wasn't in shape. Those options were right there, like objects on a table, close enough that I only had to reach out. I didn't do any of that. I went on. And only later did I understand that in that second, what mattered to me wasn't the sound, and it wasn't the song itself. It was making sure no one see me hesitate. Because in this world, hesitation is read as weakness, and weakness is too easy to replace. In 1992, that song began attaching itself to me without my consent, not as a memory, as a finished image that had already been decided. I Will Always Love You did not come out of my own personal story. The lyrics and the music had been written by Dolly Parton long before me. A calm, adult goodbye, without drama, without vows. And that was exactly what made the song difficult for me to sing. I had to fill it with my own feeling and persuade people that I was singing about myself. At a time when I didn't fully understand what inside me was responding to those words. On November 2nd, 1992, the single was released. On November 17th, the soundtrack came out. On November 25th, the film The Bodyguard was released. After that, it wasn't success. It was a dense, uninterrupted stream. Radio, television, interviews, flights, new contract terms, new restrictions. The song stayed at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 for 14 weeks. Then came reports of number 1 positions in other countries: England, Canada, Australia, Germany, Japan. Those numbers were read out to me and shown on paper, as if this were not music, but territory that had been taken. In 1994, the recording received a Grammy. Inside, it felt like acceleration that could no longer be slowed down. The reports were brought to me, and to the people handling my contract and promotion. They were spread across the table, turned page by page, discussed. There was no music in them. There were countries and deadlines: England, Canada, Australia, Germany, Japan. Those names didn't sound like celebration. They sounded like a diagnosis. You no longer exist as a person, only as a result. In those conversations, no one asked how I felt. They asked whether I could keep up the pace. And the worst part was that I answered confidently, even when I knew I was already tired. Interviews during that time were arranged almost identically. First, the lights that make your eyes ache, but you don't blink too often, so you don't look unsettled. Then the makeup artist's hands, moving quickly across your face. Someone else's fingers, someone else's hurry, someone else's certainty. Then short instructions from the side: speak more softly, smile longer. Don't get irritated, don't show fatigue. I remember one specific moment. The makeup artist brushed my lip with a finger. I felt a sharp pain, and I still didn't say anything. Because I was afraid of seeming difficult, like someone who causes problems and slows the whole process down. The label's PR team worked like a well-oiled machine. These were specific people who moved with me, from interview to interview, from studio to set. One spoke gently, as if protecting me. Another spoke dryly, in a strictly professional tone. A third tried to joke so I wouldn't tense up. But the meaning was always the same. Hold the image. Don't step outside the frame. Don't complicate it. They never said, be a symbol. They said, people need to understand you quickly. And I knew what that meant. No sharp edges, no anger, no doubt. And here is an ugly admission. I liked how quickly people adjusted themselves to me. If I didn't return a call right away, meetings were postponed without question. If I stayed silent during a discussion, the conversation stalled until I spoke. I could see how the absence of my reaction made them uneasy, and I liked it. It wasn't grandeur. It was small, everyday power, the kind that's hard to give up if you've spent your whole life afraid of being defenseless. In 1989, at the Soul Train Awards, I was booed not for the notes. I was booed because I didn't seem black enough, too pop, for a white audience. I stood on that stage and heard the noise, thick, heavy, rising from the crowd. My mouth went dry, and I caught myself trying not to change my expression, as if that alone could save me. Inside, it wasn't anger, it was shame, the kind that makes you want to shrink and disappear, as if you've been caught switching places with someone else. That episode didn't end there, in the hall. It stayed in me as a warning. Every time I was about to say something sharper, choose a more difficult path, or refuse to smooth a corner, I heard that noise again. And I stepped back. I chose to be convenient, not because I believed in it, but because I didn't want to feel that public rejection again. Back then, I didn't call it fear. I called it professionalism. I grew up in Newark. We didn't have a habit of talking about pain. We endured it. My mother held the house together with her voice and strict composure. Around her, falling apart simply wasn't allowed. My father was harsh and unpredictable. I don't remember abstract descriptions. I remember ordinary things, promises that weren't kept, conversations after which it was better to go to your room, the tension of preparing in advance for an outburst. I learned early on that closeness can hurt if you don't keep your distance. On July 18th, 1992, I married Bobby Brown. Around me, that event was read not as love, but as risk. The day after one of our family gatherings, I heard voices in another room, quiet but clear. He'll destroy her. Not, it will be hard. Not, they're different. Specifically, destroy. I walked in, and the conversation stopped. Everyone smiled. That's what my relationship with my surroundings was like. They smiled to my face and talked about me behind doors. And I pretended not to notice, not because I didn't hear it. I heard it. I just preferred not to open a conflict, because conflict meant losing control. Bobby was loud, sharp, alive. Around him, I couldn't stay manageable. He could snap. He could laugh loudly. He could say something in public that made my team tense up instantly. And sometimes I caught myself deliberately staying calm next to him, not out of wisdom, out of stubbornness. I wanted to prove to everyone that I could hold this marriage and this public story at the same time. That, too, was about power. I could love him and at the same time use him as proof of my independence. It wasn't pretty, but it was true. My mother tried to keep her composure. But we had scenes I didn't talk about publicly back then. Once, after a conversation with someone from my team, she called and said sharply, without preamble, "Are you thinking about a child? Are you thinking about the future?" I answered just as sharply, "I'm thinking about my present." And there was a pause. Not warm, heavy. I knew I was hurting her, because she was used to being the one who holds everything together. I acted as if it were a practical discussion. In reality, it was a fight for the right to live without her control. And I fought with the same weapon she used, coldness. Robin was my friend, and someone who had been close to me for many years, without contracts, without roles. She saw me without the image, and that was exactly why I became especially hard around her. I relied on her silent support when things were difficult, and pushed her away when I felt she was seeing too much. There was an evening in a hotel room. She was sitting across from me, looking at me. I said, "Don't look at me like that." She asked, "Like what?" And I said, "Like we're too close." I created distance. I did it consciously, and it felt easier, and at the same time, shameful. When filming on The Bodyguard began, everything around me grew even denser. The set lived by production time. Take, pause, move. There was always someone waiting in the trailer. Kevin Costner, my co-star, always kept a distance between us. He didn't play at closeness, and he didn't try to comfort me. It was he who insisted that the song begin without music, just voice and silence. At that moment, I was afraid, because I understood that if it didn't work, there would be no one to cover for me. At first, the film was supposed to use what becomes of the brokenhearted. It was safe. When it became clear it couldn't be used, the decision was made without me. And then they returned to Dolly Parton's song. Simple, direct, with nowhere to hide behind an effect. I understood why it was chosen, and I understood the risk. In the studio, fear was humiliating. Your palms are damp, and you wipe them on your clothes. Your throat won't swallow, even though water is right there. You hear your own breath in the microphone. And at some point, I decided to use that tension. I started singing so quietly that people in the room leaned forward. I wasn't just controlling the song, I was controlling the space of the studio, the attention of the people behind the glass. And this is my most uncomfortable truth. I liked that feeling. I liked how the anticipation thickened, how people depended on my next move. I didn't always sing for meaning. Sometimes I sang to feel power. A few days before the final approval of the track, someone from the team suggested changing the opening, making it more radio-friendly. He spoke carefully, almost apologetically, like someone who knew who he was talking to. I listened and felt irritation rise, not at him, at the very possibility of doubt. I could have answered directly. I could have said no and ended it. Instead, I said it wasn't the best time and postponed the meeting. Then I postponed another one, each time, with the same calm voice. At some point, I realized that if the conversation didn't happen again, it would simply disappear, and I let that happen. I knew what I was doing. I watched him grow quieter, stop insisting, his opinion losing weight. I could have stopped and brought the conversation back, and I didn't, because what mattered to me was not discussing the decision. It was preserving the feeling of total control. It wasn't a conflict or a victory. It was the quiet removal of doubt, and it suited me. On March 4th, 1993, I gave birth to my daughter, Bobby Christina. After that, the word love in the title of the song stopped sounding beautiful. At night, a baby, an exhausted body. The bathroom light cutting into your eyes. The smell of milk, wet wipes, cracks in your hands. During the day, people waiting for you to repeat that same moment. They didn't want me to change. They wanted the same effect again. And I gave it to them because I could. Because it was the only place where I felt I could still control what was happening. People hear love in this song. I heard a question. Is it possible to be honest and not lose everything your life is built on? I couldn't say through this song how tired I was of being convenient, how often I chose silence instead of conflict. When I received the Grammy in 1994, I smiled the way I was expected to. Inside, there was tension, not joy. I knew that any deviation from then on would be counted as a fall. Now, when I hear the first seconds of that recording, I don't remember love. I remember the inhale, The second, when it was still possible to stop. And I catch myself thinking that back then, it seemed to me, if I endure this moment, if I don't flinch, if I carry it through, that must mean I'm being honest. But the farther I am from that recording, the more often I think that maybe I was simply very good at holding myself together. And that question remains, not as a conclusion, as interference.